No, so what I think is so compelling about this film is, first of all, it does take a very deep dive at the very beginning in what it is that sits behind the objection to sports team names and mascoting. And I think that's important to understand because it can be conceived of as somehow just a sort of interesting contemporary political issue. Well, it's not that, because it sits at the very beginning of a tortured history between Native peoples who are here and those who arrived, and what happened then, and what sits behind the objection to mascoting. So I think it's important. And I must say, I think it's especially important in light of, without wandering too far into that territory tonight, what's happening right now in the United States in terms of looking at questions relating to the complexity of the history, some of the tragedy of the history of this country, and making sure that we don't begin engaging in sort of history erasures as a part of contemporary life in this country. So. That was an important aspect of it, and so I think that's the setup. But I really feel that we need to have hope for the future in all of this too. And I think what this shows are a couple of things. First of all, that Native people do take a direct interest in this question. It still has ramifications for contemporary Native people, how they live, what they think of themselves, how they see themselves as one of the threads of this great tapestry called American culture. And they want things like you saw here taken out of it, quite frankly, from our standpoint. And the third point I would say that is important to me is that this film speaks in terms, again, very relevant right now, of really movements. In other words, the gathering together of broad coalitions of non-natives and natives in opposing what the problem is that's described in the film. And it is, I think that's what this country needs right now.
We founded a few years ago Rena Flying Coyote Collective, which is named after my great-grandmother and my father's grandmother, or Loihoilat, standing out woman, her shining. And it is in the spirit of Rena that we want to do our work. Rena died during the Spanish flu in the early 1900s, and as a result, her 5 boys ended up at boarding school in Concho, Oklahoma. But it was the strength and resilience that Rena instilled in those boys that is why we are all here today, and why we are connected to community, and lucky enough to be able to try and do the work that we're doing. So shout out to my great-grandmother.
Yeah. There's been a tremendous amount of work, especially in the Chicago area where there's a pretty large urban Native community. It's got a lot of diversity in terms of tribal representation and things like that. The Chicago American Indian Community Collaborative did a lot of work with lawmakers in the state and has had some success in getting a law that passed recently that bans Native mascots in public K-12 schools. But also just passed even more recently than that is a law that requires public education K-12 in the state to teach Native history from a more comprehensive Native-focused perspective.
I was telling a story last night of when I very first started doing this work under the Sioux chef name, and I was at a chef conference in Ohio, and this was back in 2014, so it was pretty early on, but I'd already pretty much had my philosophy of, in order to showcase and highlight indigenous foods, I was taking away European foods, so there's no dairy, flour, sugar, beef, pork, chicken, same kind of philosophy that we utilize upstairs. And we were at this really kind of fancy chef's place, and it was in this outdoor kind of lunchy, dining area, and we were feeding like 350 people, you know, and it was a push to like build all these plates. And so I brought a bunch of heirloom beans. I remember having some hidatsa beans and some arugula beans and some things, and I harvested a bunch of wild plants around where we happened to be, and I just made this beautiful little dish, you know. And this lady comes through and she's like, "Oh, weird, what is this?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm featuring indigenous foods in North America, like Native American." She's like, "Well, that's weird." All right, why is that weird? And she's like, "Where are you from?" I'm like, "Minnesota." I was like, "Well, that's weird." Why is that weird? She's like, "Well, I don't know, like, are there Native people in Minnesota?" I was like, "Yeah, we have a vibrant community. We have a lot of tribes in Minnesota." And she was like, "That's weird." I was like, "Okay, well, why? Why is that so weird?" She's like, "Well, where did they come from?" And, you know, to me, like, you don't have an answer for that, really, you know, but like, it's just that's just a product of the American education system.
We started working with the folks at PBS New Mexico and PBS Learning Media, and we worked with Native educators to develop a full online free curriculum that will go along with this film. We're releasing it this fall. It'll be for free. And really, when we started thinking about where we wanted the curriculum, obviously we'd like it in every school in America. We'd like it to get everywhere. And so we were cognizant of the fact that we want the film's educational curriculum to be available anywhere to anyone, no matter where they are, whether it's at a school, whether it's in their home. Anyone with an internet connection can get this for free, and we want them to have it.